Hey everybody, I am Shira Felberbaum Kedem. I'm here tonight with my colleague Adina Segal. We are both from CaringKind, and we'd like to welcome you to a special edition of Caring for the Caregiver. We're focused on Pesach. If anybody is willing and open to brave it and put on the camera, it's always nice to feel like I'm talking to faces and can see people's expressions and get a sense of how they are enjoying the experience or what questions are percolating. But if for reasons that prevent you from doing so, we totally understand. Adina and I, we work together closely in a community outreach function in part, where we support the Jewish community. We'd love to tell you a brief word or two about CaringKind, just so you have a sense of who we are and how we're connected to this organization, what we stand for. But we'll spend more time towards the end of the presentation, and we certainly encourage you to stick around for that. Again, like I said, right now we are being recorded, but we will hold and stop the recording towards the end and give you plenty of time for questions and answers. So here's CaringKind. You can tell by our name, we're supposed to be, and hopefully we live up to being both caring and kind. And we originated in New York City. So there's us in the big city, and we're a nonprofit. Believe it or not, we are serving our families for nearly 45 years. It's pretty amazing. And our goal is really to function as a trusted partner to care partners who are on this, we consider to be like a dementia care partner journey for sometimes 5, 10, 15 years. And we want to be there to provide you with the support, the guidance, the coaching, whatever you really need during that time as you see the person living with dementia's needs change and you have to adapt and change. We want to be there for you during that period. We hope that we are consistently creating and delivering meaningful, kind of best-in-class programs and quality caregiving education. So tonight's program is really an example of that type of educational experience. And we're based with a group of staff members who really have a bunch of different disciplines. But what we get to do is provide emotional support, educational support, coaching, and we get to work with people who are also living with dementia and help them maintain the skills and the cognition that they do have. And we are passionate about advancing awareness and being involved in research and policy. But while there is no cure today, we always say that CaringKind is here to provide the support, the care. And so that is where we stand. So we're going to get to the next slide. And I'll tell you a little bit about how today is going to go. Basically, Adina and I are going to sort of split the discussion part into half. I'll start and welcome everybody, and she will conclude, and then we'll go into the Q&A. Before I go any further, I want to say that whatever we learn this evening, and this is coming just from Adina and I, not from CaringKind per se, but we really want to dedicate this to the full healing of body, mind, and soul of all the individuals for whom you're caring, so a complete total refuah. And we also want to have in mind, of course, the hostages, the hostage families, and the IDF soldiers who are fighting to protect the land, the people, and to bring back those who have been taken away from their families. And we hope that everyone does not have to experience the empty seat at the table. So tonight we'll start by setting up you all for success, and that will be taking into consideration some factors that if we pay attention to now can hopefully make things go more smoothly, kind of like anticipating what might happen and having a plan ahead kind of approach. And then we'll focus on the essence and the importance of self-compassion and self-care, which are often like poo-pooed because it's understood that, oh, wouldn't that be nice to do? But we're really going to drive home the points of why it's so essential to really focus on our own healthcare and our own well-being so that we can show up for ourselves and our others. And then we'll really put that into practice by doing some mindfulness together just for a moment or two. And then Adina will pick up with Seder considerations and family conflict and tips for Pesach preparation. And then for those of you who perhaps are more stringent halakhically, you follow Jewish law to the letter of the law, and you might be interested in consulting your rabbi and finding out how to navigate some of the prep that's connected to, let's say, Pesach cleaning and making it through the meals and finding out what you can and can't have to eat and those types of things. We talk about consulting your rabbi, and no program would be complete if we did not make sure that you knew that CaringKind is not just here for this one time, but that really we are available to you along this journey as your needs and the person for whom you're caring's needs change. And so we will give you a little bit more of a deep dive into CaringKind's program and services. And then we will open it up to address any comments or questions that you all may have. That's a little bit about tonight. Adina, I'm good when you are. Thank you. Okay, here's our string on the finger. Things to remember. So I think it's very natural that when we are a primary care partner, that we feel entitled to a sense of being able to manage and orchestrate someone's experience. And we almost feel responsible for ensuring that their mood and their actions are appropriate and that they're upbeat and positive. And as much as we wish that we had that sort of ability, the truth is that with any amount of coaching that anyone at CaringKind could do in terms of managing what we used to refer to as behaviors, but we now think of as unmet needs, we really still can't ensure that someone living with dementia is going to be in a positive mood and kind of act in a socially appropriate way, right? In fact, we can only do our best with ourselves on any given moment. And all of us know that we have, without any form of dementia, we have good days and bad days. We have days where we're happier or less happy. We have events that happen, circumstances that make us more tense or less tense, and sometimes that shows. So we have to really remember that as long as we're all doing our best in terms of setting things up for success, what's going to happen is going to happen, and it's going to be left to us to manage how we respond. And I think that's a very interesting concept that we'll come back to, because in general, we have to remember that even though this health condition is essentially invisible to the naked eye, right? We can't see that someone's brain is deteriorating just by looking at them, the way you might be able to see someone with hearing aids and, a walker, and, you don't have the same cues to be able to tell that they're experiencing a decline. But, we cannot control how they're behaving, because presumably they're doing the best they can. So that means that as care partners, it's important for us to be able to adapt and to change and to make the best of the situation. So we have, in some ways, that's empowering, right? We have a little bit more control of how we manage the situation. So we just need to be self-aware. We also want to acknowledge that things may be different than they were in the past. So perhaps in previous years, your person was the leader of the Seder and was the person who gave over the stories and the person who kind of orchestrated things. Or maybe your person was the person who always had the funny jokes or always acted something out, or who would sing the songs. And maybe this year, it's not going to quite go that way. And I think going into that with the recognition that last year was special because of how last year was, and not expecting that this year's special has to look the same way, is very helpful, because it kind of helps you manage your expectations. And then maybe you get a surprise aha when that person connects to the music and starts singing a song, and you're like, wow, I didn't realize that person could show up in that way. Now I haven't seen that aspect of him or her in so long. But the reality is that a year's passage of time living with dementia can be significant, especially, let's say someone had a fall. There's certain things, or someone has a urinary tract infection. We know there's certain things that are going to cause things to be more progressed. And we just want to try and be as okay with however it ends up being. As long as our person is safe and the people around them are safe, then that's kind of like our measure of we're doing a good job. And we'll just do the best we can to accept however it goes. In terms of the Seder being a wonderful experience, it's kind of hard to imagine. Sometimes we say that a person with dementia is a person living with dementia, but that their life is sort of declining. And it's true, this is a progressive health condition, but we put the emphasis in CaringKind on L, the living, the PLWD, the L there stands for living. We really say this is a person living with dementia. And we firmly believe that it's possible for a person to have meaningful connection and rewarding experiences. And so through the Seder, just as though we are commanded to give over and to recall the Exodus from Egypt, we are in fact able to connect to other times. And the person who is living with dementia can also be part of that experience and can connect and can even in that moment create new positive experiences, even if they may not recall it. Like the moment the Seder ends and, the next morning we wake up and you say, wasn't that a beautiful Seder? And they may have zero recognition or recall of the experience. They are still able to experience meaning and connection in the moment. And in fact, we'll talk about how just amazing it is that people living with dementia are masterful at being in the moment. And so we'll try to learn something from that, because some of us who aren't living with dementia can find that a little tricky. And we say that during the Seder and the holiday as a whole, right? Some people will be celebrating, commemorating for 8 days. Some people will maybe do a first night Seder. Some people do a first and a second night. Everyone has a little bit of a different practice. But during that period of time, that whatever we can do to sort of stay in the moment for ourselves and to appreciate the experience for whatever it is, then will set us up for success. We're going to try and think less of the shoulds and the shouldn'ts and more of just like, this is what it is. And it's kind of like retraining our mind. Okay, Adina, whenever you're ready, thank you. So here we are, 3 Pesach considerations to setting yourselves up for success. What does that look like? So if we want to get to that road where we see success ahead, a lot of it, as we've mentioned, has to do with changing how we approach things, how we think of things. And it's also helpful to think about what were previous years like. So maybe in the most recent number of Seder and the recent times that you got together for Seder, what was it like? And what specifically was the role of the person living with dementia? If you were someone who always hosted the meal versus if you were someone who were hosted by others at the meal, were you in a situation where, regardless of whether you were hosting or being hosted, the person had a leadership role? Depending on their role, we're going to want to think creatively about how do we make them still feel like they have something significant to contribute without putting the pressure on them that they should have to somehow show up, remember, and do something and orchestrate things the way they had previously when they were healthier. And so it's kind of like trying to find that right balance. And so I would be thinking about things like, am I going to be at home? Am I going to be in a different environment? Is the environment going to be packed? Like if we go to a synagogue, for instance, there might be 100 people sitting in the shul Seder. That might be very different than having a Seder in our home where we might have 12 people, or where we go to someone else's house that might have 20 or 5. And so it's really thinking about the environment and trying to understand what is it about that environment that you need to be mindful of. So if the person was in fact the host, who can we pair your host with so that they are comfortable, the person understands that they're going to kind of help and support the person shine, and knows like to take cues either from you or from the person about when they need some support, so that we let them feel comfortable versus when do we take a step back. If the person's not going to be a host, who could they sit next to so that they have someone who can maybe help them follow along on the page number or point out that we're just beginning on this song, or whatever it might be, just light cues to help them feel included. And if you have a choice between where you are going to go for your meal or to whom you're going to go, or if you're going to host, you might be thinking about things like, where does my person usually do the best? Does my person do the best in a large environment where there's other stimulation going on and they don't really have to carry the conversation because others around them are carrying it? Or do they do better in kind of a smaller situation where there's not like competing conversations potentially going on and there's less distractions and they can really just focus on one conversation at a time, so that you can tailor the experience so that it's helpful for your person and you to thrive? And maybe it's about identifying who's a go-to person if you realize that your person needs to be taken away from the table and that very long meal to have a chance to kind of regroup. Maybe they're becoming agitated. And where could you go? And certainly if it's in your own home, you know that space really well. But if you're in someone else's home, you might not be as familiar. And if you're in a shul or some other synagogue, you might not be as familiar. So really thinking strategically ahead of time of the layout and who are the people you have available to you to help you sort of navigate what might happen, right? Because any of us can be really good at paying attention and be focused for a period of time. But sometimes we get to that too much point. And it's a long night and it's a long meal and it's a late evening. And so all those combination of things means that there's reason to believe that at some point, at least temporarily, it might feel like too much. So having some kind of plan in place is quite helpful. And maybe you can think through in advance what amount of information is appropriate for the other members who are going to be at this meal or meals, for them to know about how your person living with dementia is doing. Like if no one knows anything, will they notice a big change if they see your person now for the first time? Is it kind of gradual and you think they won't notice? Do these folks already know? Will some people know and not know? Sometimes, you know, when there is a loss of a loved one and someone has literally died, we talk about the empty seat at the table. And there's the concept of the elephant. Do we acknowledge that there's someone who's not normally here who usually is here? And often in bereavement programs, we'll talk about, well, rather than kind of glossing over it, what if we intentionally build in some tradition, we build in some ritual to acknowledge and commemorate, and so it's sort of a similar topic in that, do we gloss over the fact that someone's health condition has changed significantly and how it might change the dynamic of the Seder? Or do we sort of choose to step into that and maybe see if we can all get on the same page? So, always figuring out what you want to share with different people, your folks and your relationships with people, and not everyone wants this out there in the same ways to all people, but maybe there's something that can be said across the board, just in terms of, maybe there might be some repetition of, or maybe we need to pause a little bit before expecting an answer right away, things of that nature. In terms of how to share the information with the family members that you choose to share information with, or the friends that you choose to share information with, everyone kind of finds what's right for them. For some people, it might be like, okay, I think we haven't really talked very much about this, but I just want to let you know, because we're all going to be together, this might be a lot for our person. This is what's going on, and this is how it might manifest itself. This is what you might notice. Other people might say, oh my gosh, you're in the loop now, you're going to see it firsthand. Or you might be like, they're going to be so good because they're always on in front of other people, and it's going to crush me that when they're home, they're completely different. But whatever it is, it's an opportunity also for you to get support and say, would anyone else be comfortable stepping in so that I can really be meaningfully engaged in Passover, because it's important for me to get that sense of freedom and liberation from Pesach too. And if I feel like I'm on 100% of the time, maybe I don't get to experience that sense of being liberated that I need. So it's a chance to sort of invite other people into your caring circle and to try to extend that support network that we try to build. We always talk about it like taking a village. It does. It takes a village. There's a lot of responsibility to care for someone living with dementia. And we need as much of a support system in place as we can. So this is really an opportunity to broaden that support circle. In terms of developing a cope ahead plan, there's an interesting idea that says, you don't want to expect that everything is going to be awful. Everything might be quite beautiful, but by developing a sense of what you imagine might be those sticking points where things become a little bit challenging, and having a sort of, if this happens, then I'll do this. If this happens, then I will do one of these things. Just having like a light concept of who you'll go to or where you'll go to kind of get things more manageable can be helpful. And then hopefully you make it through the evenings and it's beautiful and everything goes, and you didn't need any of those plans. But it's sort of the difference between having to deal with something in a crisis moment, like everyone's trying to concentrate and people are really hungry and the night's getting late and the last thing they want to do is have experience a delay, and you're trying to manage and you see your person getting agitated, like you want to know, like, okay, if I see the signs, I'm gonna excuse ourselves in a kind of discreet way for a few minutes. So something to that effect, and we can talk more about that later on. But at least for now, that's kind of what that cope ahead plan is. It's like the summary of all the things we just talked about. Thanks, Adina. Okay, that heart is so perfect. Self-compassion. So it often seems that we have developed this ability to be incredibly wonderful friends to other people. And we can give people sometimes the benefit of the doubt and say, oh, we can be so supportive. You did your best and you had the best of intentions. And, I think you're being hard on yourself. But sometimes when it comes to ourselves, we're not as kind. We may talk to ourselves in a way that leaves something to be desired. And so we're going to ask everyone, particularly in those moments that feel pretty tricky, to maybe lean into the idea that if you could try to talk to yourself as you would talk to one of your dear friends, then maybe you'll be more kind with yourself. And we think that's really important because a lot of things happen, but I don't know about for you guys, but of all of the holidays we have in the life cycles and all of the holidays we have throughout the Jewish calendar year, it seems that the one that comes to mind for me, at least, that has the biggest angst and the most anxiety around it is Passover. And it's kind of ironic because Pesach is all about liberation and freedom. But for those who engage in sort of more of the formal practices in terms of preparing for Pesach, that might include the cleaning things that we'll get to in the end, and the the toiling of dishes and the cleaning of the dishes and having separate dishes, and not just separate for meat and milk, but separate from the rest of the year, and getting rid of the chametz and the bread and the crumbs and it's not just chametz, it's bread, and chametz is so much bread. You can go to like the nth degree. I'm sort of thinking about it. Sometimes we joke like, the moment Purim ends of all this joy, next thing you know, you have this headache. The truth is, right? Pesach is supposed to be very beautiful, and it's supposed to be like a sense of freedom, getting out of your narrow, confined spots. It's supposed to be giving you a sense of space and I don't know, like just hope that like you can get out of the spot you're in where you might feel stuck. And I think the preparation does not lend itself to that very well. So I'm just suggesting that given that reality, sometimes the household can get a little tense, and just offering again sort of like the value in having some mindfulness, taking things step by step, trying to chunk things out, and really almost looking to your person or people in your lives who are living with dementia, and to think about how they're kind of like our models and how to live mindfully, and what can we do to lean into how they're living life in the moment that we can sort of take on for ourselves. And we'll get back to mindfulness again before we finish. We talk here about nullification of chametz and acknowledging our humanness. So we kind of compare the chametz, the bread, and the sort of the arrogance that comes from the being inflated when the dough has time to rise, kind of like a challah, as compared to sort of the flatness of the matzah, and knowing that like we all have that with which we need to deal, and managing our sense of self. It's not always easy. It's like it's an opportunity to kind of like reflect on our midot, on our character traits, and sort of think like, how can we show up and be our best? But we're not like the sacrificial lamb, and so we kind of need to give ourselves some bandwidth to just be, and to realize we're all doing the best we can. If we're all going through each day and each hour doing the best we can, maybe we scream and we raise our voice and we're not as patient as we can be when our person living with dementia asks us the same question for the 49th time, even though for them it's only the first. But we just sort of say, okay, there's another opportunity for me to do better, because there's going to be another question or another comment coming very soon. I'll just do my best to do better next time, as opposed to, I can't believe this is me. I know I should be more patient. I know it's the health condition. I'm just so disappointed in myself, right? That's, it's probably something that's true. It is the condition. It's not necessarily the person, and separating the disease or the health condition from the person is very helpful, but it's not always easy in that moment to maintain that sort of calm. We talk about caring for yourself as something that actually helps you care for the person that you're trying to care for. We all are familiar with the oxygen masks on the flight attendants as they get ready to board, and they talk to us about the safety. And for the longest time, I just thought that concept was anything but intuitive. Why in the world would I put oxygen masks on myself when the person who can't put it on for themselves, like a child or someone who has a major health condition, can't do it? Why wouldn't I do it for them first? Obviously they need my help. That doesn't make any sense. But the idea, again, as we all know now, is if we don't care for ourselves, then we can't show up for anybody else. And the most stark example of this is if you are all primary care partners, and you may or may not be, but if you are a primary care partner and you find yourself always caring for your partner and everyone else, but neglecting your own health and well-being, all you have to do is think about, if God forbid, like if something were, let's to happen to you and you weren't able to be present in that care partner role, how would your person be cared for? And sometimes it's taking it to that very extreme sort of thought that makes us go, oh yeah, I actually have to take care of myself because I'm unable, I jeopardize my ability to care for the person I'm trying to care for if I don't also care for myself. Hey, by the way, it's not so bad to care for yourself too, but like that kind of makes it like it's part and parcel of caring for your person is in fact caring for yourself. And sometimes that reframe is enough to help people think about that. And we talk about slowing down as compared to like the haste. So we think of Pesach and we think about the need to run, and there's no time to bake the bread. And so there's matzah, and you're running and you're running and running because people are chasing after you and trying to save your lives, and you're getting out of town because finally you have freedom and you don't want them to change their mind and say, no, actually, we want you to be enslaved again. And I think that same sort of thing happens in our household. We're running against the clock, and there's a sense of tension, time's running out, and we have to get everything done in order. And has to be, I'm not going to say the word perfect, but it has to be so much better. And we're looking for this sort of way of being. And you know what ends up happening? I bet everyone's been there. We get short-tempered. And the last thing we want to do with any person who's living with any form of dementia is try to rush them along. They're doing the best they can, but a really helpful rule of thumb is just to sort of think that any task that takes you X amount of time, to do it with a person living with dementia, whether it's to shower, bathe, dress, walk, everything just tends to take longer. And so if we're trying to accelerate and that they aren't even able to keep up with sort of your normal pace, like maybe you take a stroll and all of a sudden you're realizing you're having to walk a lot more slowly, or you're, dedicating time to get in and out of a car, in and out of a taxi, or whatever it may be. And all these things just start taking more and more time. If they can't keep up with your everyday, they certainly are not going to be well positioned to keep up with your accelerated pace. And that accelerated pace, when you're trying to go really, really fast and they're not able to even go the other, it just creates friction. And we tend to get then frustrated, and they then get unrattled. And there's a sense of the calm in the home sort of dissipating. So we want to try to avoid that. Thanks, Adina. Okay, self-care, self-compassion, very much connected. So we really talk about building this larger group of people who can help. And sometimes people think of the people in their lives who can be the helpers as who are the friends I can call, or who are the family members I can call, or who are the paid professionals I can call. Sometimes we get stuck in the, they're not going to do it the way I would have done it. They're not going to do as good a job. They're going to do a good job, but they're not going to do it in the way in which I want them to do it. And that lets us, that kind of prevents us rather from being able to bring in other people for support. And sometimes we just have to say, it's true. It might not be as good. It might not be the exact way we want it, but it's the only way I'm going to get through this very intense time. And having this is better than nothing. Other times we say, no, it's not possible. The people I'm closest to, they live far away. And the people I'm close to, they have other responsibilities. And it's true, like not everyone can help in the same way. So one of the things that we like to do is to think about the people in our lives and to figure out different ways to make sense of who we have in our network. So some people are like the doers. They can do something concrete that is right next door to you, and they can make it happen. They can make the meal and bring it to your house. They can pick you up and escort you to where you're trying to get to for a meal someplace else. They can make it happen. Other people, they are far away and they can't possibly do those things, but they are a really good listening ear, and they are willing and feel honored and privileged that you reach out to them to talk to them about what you're feeling and how you're managing what's going on and what your concerns are and how you're planning to handle something and bantering ideas. And that's how they can provide support. And for somebody else, those are the people who can say, okay, you've been cleaning for a bazillion hours. The house is as good as it's going to get. You've gotten the right food. You've ordered, you've made, we're going to go out. We're going to distract. We're going to watch the sunrise. We're going to watch the sunset. We're going to go for a nice walk around the reservoir. We're going to do something nice. And those are your distractors. And all of those people in your life are valuable in different ways. And so sometimes it's tapping into that network. And if for every reason you feel that even with neighbors and, people who are family members and friends, you don't have that, there are professionals who can step in and do the cleaning or the catering or whatnot. And so maybe this year, every other year you've done homemade food, and this year you're going to cater. Okay, so this year you cater. That's what's going to make it more manageable, and it's going to allow you to be more present. So those are the kinds of things that we think about around self-care. We also talk about managing expectations and thinking about whose expectations are we even talking about? Are we talking about our own? Are we talking about the expectations of others? But how do we manage them? So we sometimes think about what our abilities are relative to what we'd like them to be. And accepting that we are where we are is a hard process, but we could look at where our limitations are and maybe where the limitations are of the people living with dementia. But we also can flip it from a strengths-based perspective and sort of look at what are our capabilities, what are our strengths. Like if you actually enjoy cooking and find that it feels creative and you feel like, you express yourself and it's fun and relaxing for you, and you either hosting or bringing to someone and you can make something and that will give you some type of respite, maybe like lean into that. If for somebody else, let's talk about your person living with dementia, the person living with dementia is really, always been the one who's sang. And this year you're not sure if that person can lead the singing, but that if the tune starts, that person's going to join right in. Then you could be like, okay, who can I pair my person with? So that when that favorite song comes in, someone else can lead it, but then I know my person's going to chime in. And you might have a chance to experience like a glimpse of what you've always remembered your person to be at that Passover Seder, So you want to lean into something that you think resonates for yourself that you can do, and something that resonates for your person living with dementia. And then, of course, we talked before, like not everything is in our control, and that's so hard to accept. And yet it's true. There's a lot that's not in our control. And if we can sort of, the serenity prayer kind of gives us the opportunity to think through what is in our control, what is in our influence, and what is outside of it. And for the things that we have control over, that we have influence over, how do we lean into that and take more of a role, and then sort of let go of the things we can't? So there's probably enough to worry about just with the things that are within our control. So if we focus on those and we let go of some of the others, we'll still be plenty busy. And that's kind of like the paradigm. But the hardest thing is figuring out what is really in my control and what isn't. And once we wrap our head around that, then I think it makes it a lot easier. Sometimes for those folks who are more observant, leaning into rabbinic guidance can be incredibly helpful. And Adina will go into more about that later on. But there really is a difference between cleaning for Pesach and trying to remove the things that we identify as chametz, the things that we are not supposed to be in possession of, versus spring cleaning. They coincide in timing, which is why we get stuck every time, but it's not spring cleaning. And so we want to set that up for more to come in a little bit. And whatever extent you can, chunk out your time and reward yourself. Like if you've done something that, is pretty difficult for you to tackle, maybe it's a room that's, particularly hard to clean for, or, writing that email or calling people and letting them know the condition that your person's in. And that was really hard for you to do that. So then, how can you pause and do something that will feel like a little bit of a treat, and bring you some happiness? And we'll have to balance that. Maybe it's listening to some music while you're doing some prep around the house. Maybe it's, going out and saying, oh, gee, what new ingredients could I, use to make something special? Or, what new Judaica could we have? I don't know. There's something that we can do that will make us feel a little bit of joy. And that's where all those people in your life we talked about before, we said some of those are like the distractors. Who are the distractors? You're going to call, and they're not going to ask you a thing about what's going on in your caregiving role for the person with dementia. They're going to talk about something else, and you're just going to get lost in sort of whatever that is. You see a movie, you read a book, you learn something, whatever it might be. So that's a little bit about self-care. Thanks, Adina. Okay, so I'm wondering if those of you who are right now off camera are able to do this, and I don't really know, but anyone who is on the Zoom meeting, I'd like to invite us to actually participate in like a 1-minute exercise. And it's the opportunity to focus on staying in the present moment. And we say that the exodus from Egypt happened in the past, but what are we actually commanded to do? We're commanded to relive the experience as though it's happening to us in the present. And that very act of trying to relive it is practiced in different ways, right? There are some communities who will go around and have everyone slouching to one side and the left and leaning, and somebody else is going to be whacking someone over the head with like a palm branch. There are all different kinds of practices to make it feel like it is happening now, and it's not just a story that's being told. And we ask lots of questions, particularly the children. They get engaged because it's supposed to be active, like you are immersing yourself. Like there are very few mitzvot where you can immerse yourself in the mitzvah. Getting into a sukkah, you are immersing yourself. Getting into a mikvah, you are immersing yourself. There aren't many of those mitzvot, and I think that Pesach kind of attempts that too. You're being immersed in the story of it. And so if we could focus for a moment on the image on the screen, I'm going to think, I can invite you to, maybe close your eyes, get into a comfortable position. And we're going to think about using our 5 senses. And I'm wondering if we can think about first engaging the sense of touch. And what are 5 things that we can feel as we are in this call now? Just kind of identify 5 things that you can touch. It could be how you're seated, feeling you're behind against a chair or on a couch or bed. It could be where your arms are leaning against the armrests or on your lap. 5 things that you can really feel where your feet are planted. And then after you've identified 5 things that you can touch, think about 4 things that you can hear. I'm hearing the swish of the air against the flowers outside or the raindrops falling on my windowsill, or maybe I hear the cars racing by. So now that we've identified what we can feel and hear, what about 3 things that when we open our eyes now, we can see? What are 3 things? Are we aware of the contrast of the light? Are we looking at the image with the ripples of the drop in the water? Are we looking at photographs or paintings we might have around us? What are we looking at? So we figured out things that we can feel, we can hear, we can see. What about 2 things we can smell? Spring flowers being planted, fresh planting outside, the gardening. Or maybe someone cooking something delicious that's going to be our dinner as soon as we get off this call. And what's one thing that we can taste? Maybe we just had a beverage, tea, iced lemonade. And if we can come back to sort of the center and realize that that whole experience took us probably less than 2 minutes, and just think about how grounding it can be if we can build in these little moments. I think the concept of mindfulness and self-care often get wrapped up into something that seemed too big to take on. Like, oh, it must be a full spa day, head to toe, or, I'm going to leave the kids and the grandkids and go away to a mountain and take a hike for 2 days. It seems very much larger than life. But if we can just set aside a minute or 2, put some cold water on our face, put some lotion with our favorite smell on our hands, put on perfume or cologne, hold something that's like a squishy, I don't know the better word for that, stress ball or something. It's amazing how much can happen to regulate ourselves in a moment or 2. And then we kind of can re-enter our discussions and engagement with our person or people living with dementia, and we can be much calmer. And it's amazing how when we're calmer, our interactions go all that much more smoothly. So I'm going to turn this over now, I believe, to Adina.
Thank you, Shira.
Yes, you're welcome.
So I'm going to start with some things to consider about the Seder night itself. I know Shira may have touched on some of these things, but I think we're going to expand it a bit more. So I know, Shira, you kind of mentioned about thinking about where the person who has dementia can leave. They might need to go to a quiet room during the Seder. A lot of times we may not realize it, but it's very possible for people with dementia to get overstimulated. There are a lot of people, there may be a lot of kids, there may be a lot of noise, and they might be able to tolerate it for a little bit, but after a while it can get kind of stressful for them, and they may need to be able to decompress in a quiet room. So it's always a good idea to have some sort of a space for the person with dementia to go to just be alone, be in the quiet, and be able to kind of decompress from all of that stimulation. Keep in mind with that, that they may not really be able to sit through the entire Seder. It really may be too long, or there may be too many things and processes and hustle and bustle for them to be able to tolerate. So keep an open mind with that about how long they can actually tolerate being at the Seder. You might want to consider doing an early pre-Seder if it's going to be too hard for that person to tolerate staying up and sitting for the whole thing. You can also try to do a shortened Seder in the beginning. You can talk to your rabbi about the parts that are absolutely essential to for a Seder, and then you can always go back and do the longer parts that might not be as essential for the talking about the story of the Exodus. So then you can also have snacks available for the person with dementia. If there are kids at the table, it's sort of like, you're killing 2 birds with 1 stone, because anyone who has kids know that that's also a very useful tip. And another thing to keep in mind, even with, say, doing a shortened Seder or things like that, is we do want to encourage them to engage in the songs. The songs are really beneficial for the person with dementia. They usually are the most salient. They usually evoke a lot of memory. There may be people they associate with it with them, or stories that they associate with them. So we do want them to be able to have that opportunity as well. To that end, we will be talking about our other programs. We actually are going to be doing an event next week for our annual meeting, where we're actually going to be discussing the importance of music as it relates to dementia care. So it's kind of an interesting intersection that we're kind of coming up with, or coming up on. But we do want to keep in mind that these things are engaging, are the most engaging for the person with dementia, and to try to incorporate that and make and have them be able to engage in singing the songs for the Seder. Other things to keep in mind, and this may be things you might want to tell somebody, tell other family members in person. You might want to put it in that email that Shira was mentioning. Really, really important to tell family members not to test the person who has dementia to see who they remember. Do you remember who I am? Don't you remember me? I'm your, cousin Jeremy, or, I'm your granddaughter, or whoever. A lot of times that will really be very stressful for the person with dementia. They may remember the person. They may not be able to put the name to the person. They may not be able to put the relationship to the person. Really, in general, what we often will tell people who we're coaching is, you don't really want to use the words, do you remember, or remember, to somebody who has dementia. The answer is they probably don't. And a lot of times it will just make them feel pretty bad, and it might even increase agitation, because it's just another reminder that they're not remembering things. Other tips, you don't really want to seat the person at the head or the middle of the table. There's a lot of hustle and but at the head of the table, they're in the spotlight. That might be a little too much pressure for them. In the middle of the table, there might be a lot of hustle and bustle around. It might be hard for them to get to the bathroom, particularly if they have mobility impairments. So, unless they really have a specific seat they want to sit at, it's probably best to keep them in a spot that is accessible to an exit if they have to go somewhere, and that's not as in the hustle and bustle of the Seder table. Really important to be flexible. I guess I kind of mentioned that in the last slide. If they need to leave, that should be okay. A lot of times in general, when it comes to dementia care, and there's a whole movement around this in terms of using like improv techniques in dementia care. And in improv, it's a type of comedy where you have to be flexible. You're just taking whatever stimulus is coming to you and you're just using it. So a lot of times that thinking, we call it yes and thinking. It's not either or, it's yes and. So we really want to, if the person is feeling uncomfortable in whatever way, instead of trying to fight that discomfort, we're really going to try, you want to try to see how can you relieve that discomfort. And that will require can require some flexibility. Ideally, obviously also, unless the person really wants to, try not to put them in the spotlight. It might be hard for them to read the Haggadah. They might, either have difficulty reading it. They might trip up. They might read the wrong thing. There also, you can be flexible if necessary, but it might be more helpful to read it together with them, or to have somebody read it with them, or see if they want to read it. If they don't want to read it, obviously don't force it. Also, we really want to make this a nice night, a fun night, a memorable night. Even if it's not necessarily memorable for them and memorable for the family, you might want to consider easing any health restrictions on diet for the Seder night. Obviously, you want to talk to your doctor. We don't want anybody getting into a diabetic coma. But for most people, if their dietary restrictions are eased for one night, it's okay. Especially if there are special dishes and recipes that have been made, according to family traditions or things like that. Like, let them be able to have a moment to enjoy that. The converse is also true. If they don't want to eat, don't force them to eat. Even if you slaved away at making their favorite dish, perhaps they're at a moment where they're not really hungry. Don't try to force it if they don't want to. Another very common thing that happens at the Seder, at any family gathering, is a person with dementia might start asking about deceased relatives, like where are they? And that can be very distressing, obviously, for family members, because somebody may have been dead for quite some time, or even if it's a new death, it might be hard to kind of have to re-experience telling them that the person died. And I tend to tell people, because this is something that comes up a lot. It's a lot of times it's trial and error. For some people, if you tell them that that person passed away, it may work. For a lot of people who have dementia, if they're told that a person has passed away, they will start experiencing that grief over and over as if it was the first time they ever heard it. We don't want that to happen. So a lot of times, the question becomes, should you tell the person that the person passed away? Should you lie? A lot of times it's very hard to lie. People don't want to lie. Probably the best way of handling this is sort of reminiscing with the person about the deceased. Where'd your father go? Oh, I remember when dad took us to this great trip on Pesach one year, and we had such a great time, and trying to get them sort of into a memory of something that happened with the person who died, and then trying to deflect them onto another topic is probably the best way of handling that, so that they don't have to experiencing receiving bad news for what feels for them like the first time. And overall, we really want to keep the experience a positive one, upbeat, fun, and really trying to keep that front and center in terms of our goals for the night or the nights. Now, another very common issue that comes up, I think with all holidays, I think with Pesach, it comes up a lot, or it can come up a lot, and that is family conflict. If there is a family conflict, it can like mushroom with any sort of holiday, and certainly with Pesach. And here also, it's best if there's a way to kind of, work with the other family members to work together to make it a pleasant experience for the person who has dementia. It may mean not discussing certain topics. And I mean, that could be a lot of different topics. I mean, I know like around Thanksgiving time, often you'll see all these blog posts that start popping up in various social media stuff where, what to deal with around politics at the table or other difficult discussions. It may be that this is not to be discussed tonight because we want to keep it positive. We want to keep it, an enjoyable evening without fighting. It may mean not talking about the person who has dementia and their medical condition and, the tensions that might be happening around their diagnosis. It's not uncommon for family members to have conflict around whether or not the person, what the needs are of the person who is living with dementia. Some people, what we usually find often is that you'll have the primary caregiver who's insisting that the person who has dementia needs care, maybe needs more care, and then you'll have another family member, often who might be living far away, comes for a week or so. The person who has dementia can kind of put it together or pull it together, and then they don't understand what the other sibling is saying. Like, I don't know, they seem to be fine. So obviously mom or dad doesn't really need as much care as you're thinking, and there can be a lot of disagreements around that. So if that is a situation, then it may be worth it to not really talk about that in depth on the night of Pesach. You really want to try to find whatever common ground you can, things that you can agree on, things that are safe to talk about. Other things to keep in mind that also tends to be a source of conflict is realizing that, different family members do things differently, and that doesn't necessarily mean better or worse. I found that there are many caregivers who I work with where, it may be that there are family members who want to help, but because they're not doing it the way that maybe the primary caregiver is comfortable with, they don't want to enlist them in helping, even though the person's not going to be in any real danger or in any sort of um, detracted position just because, another family member is doing things in a different way. So I guess it's back to that theme of flexibility where, just because things are different doesn't necessarily mean better or worse. And then lastly, and I know Shira, you also pointed this out about accepting things that you can't change. Sometimes there are things that are just intractable. People are not going to always agree with us or see things eye to eye, and really try to work on just accepting what is and dealing with the situations as it is, instead of, striving or working towards something that may not necessarily be able to ever happen. So some tips for Pesach preparations. This is, I guess, more along the lines for those who are halachically observant. I know we have different people on this call who may be having different practices. It's ideal to make lists and menus to help prioritize. It's best to prioritize big projects first. So, maybe prioritize where is most of the food. Where is the kitchen, maybe the kitchen, the dining room, the places where the big offenders, that should really, be the bulk of where the work is. In terms of home health aides, I know that can often be a stress for people in terms of, well, what do I do about Pesach with my home health aide? You want to speak to them about Pesach, about the preparations, about any food restrictions they can expect during the holidays. Obviously, consult with your rabbi about parameters. Different people have different practices. But I think it's important that the home health aides obviously be prepared from, way before Pesach, know what the expectation is. If they do bring in food, where they can bring it, where they can't bring it. If they can't bring in food, they should know that where they can get their food. Those are all important things to discuss beforehand. Also, not really Pesach related, but seasonal related, you want to make sure to inquire that your home health aide is going to be covered. Pesach often does coincide with Easter and other holidays. And so, you want to make sure that the home health aide is actually going to be there. So that's another important thing. Other things to consider: simplifying meals, catering, going to other family members or friends for Seder or other meals. And then lastly, that there are also respite care options. There are places, particularly senior living facilities, that may be able to take people in for the short term, that are kosher for Pesach, and where, the person can stay for a bit. For some families, it might be like a trial run, like if they've been kind of on the fence about whether or not they are looking at assisted living for their person. It might be good to, okay, well, let's try it out for Pesach and see if that works for us, how the person responds to it. So that's also another idea to consider. So other things to think about in terms of the person with dementia. So as I think Shira certainly touched on, and I certainly can relate to, Pesach often heightens people's anxieties, right? And so people living with dementia will probably have that same heightened anxiety, or could have that heightened anxiety. So it might be, especially pre-Pesach, so it might be helpful to distract them or not discuss Pesach until we're really close to the Seder. I mean, I've had clients who have had to do that, where literally they're not talking about Pesach until like Erev Pesach, because otherwise it's the person with dementia might get too anxious. They might be obsessing over what day it is, is it Pesach, getting confused about the days. So, your person, but that is definitely something to keep in mind. And for those people especially, it might be helpful to have cleaning done when they're not present in the home. And this is sort of where Shira was talking about trying to think about who you can enlist, to maybe take the person out or distract them in some way, so that you or a cleaning person can come in, do what needs to get done, and then without the person with dementia knowing and experiencing that heightened anxiety from that awareness. Okay, other things to consider. particularly in terms of the kitchen, you might want to consider getting a special Pesach microwave or a single burner instead of doing the whole stove. You might think about other ways to cut down on cleaning. So, closing up certain cabinets or shelves in the fridge. So it's a smaller area of things you have to keep in mind of having be kosher for Pesach. Use signs to indicate what is kosher for Pesach, what is chametz. Use different colors and use pictures if necessary, because it may not necessarily register just by seeing the sign, the letter signage, the word signage, I should say. So colors and pictures might be helpful. I actually have this really cute thing. I mean, it's not necessarily dementia specific, but there, instead of, we have this like police line tape, except it says caution, chametz, anyway. So, but using those sorts of prompts to help a person know what is appropriate to use on Pesach and what is not. If the person asks for chametz on Pesach, you should explain to them that you don't have it in the home, and you can tell them what is available in the home. You don't really want to get into a conversation about chametz and Pesach. In general, I'm sure many of you know already, when you're talking to somebody with dementia, trying to argue with them does not work. Trying to appeal to logic does not work. You really want to, you validate emotions and kind of be very matter of fact about things and move forward. So you do not want to necessarily get into a long discussion about chametz and Pesach with the person. Another thing to keep in mind after Pesach is that it might be difficult to transition post-Pesach back to chametz. So, after Pesach, there's no real buildup. I guess, unless you're Chabad and you do a Mashiach Suda, but even then, it's not like it's not at the very end. There's no real ritual that we have to say, okay, let's go back to chametz. Actually, all right, maybe in some cultures, but overall, no. So you want to be mindful of that. You want to be mindful that transition might be difficult. The person may want to have matzah for a couple of days or so after, because it's going to be hard for them to conceptualize the fact that Pesach is over. So, okay, as we've mentioned a couple of times, it's really important to consult your rabbi when it comes to Pesach and dementia. In many instances, the person with dementia may not be obligated in certain activities given their abilities. And you, as a caregiver, might not be required to facilitate their performing of certain mitzvot. So you do want to, obviously, I'm in no way a rabbi able to dispense anything, but I can say from what I do know, it is always helpful to ask a rabbi. It's also important to distinguish what is a mitzvah, what is a minhag. That also may make life a bit easier, especially, the rabbi says you don't have to do, whatever. The rabbi also will know the halachic tools that are available in your given situation. If there's a real, true halachic prohibition, how to sort of deal with it. And as with all halachic issues, all situations are individual and unique. So it's really important to be able to, have the individual consultations with a rabbi about your specific needs as they come up. So just in terms of this presentation, the Pesach presentation, just some questions to leave with you to think about to enhance your Pesach. Thinking about what are some Seder practices that could enhance the experience for a person living with dementia, and also think about whether there are practices or customs that might detract from the experience for the person living with dementia. And actually, thinking about those questions might also help you conceptualize anything you might have to ask your rabbi about. So those are just some things to think about. And with that, I wanted to kind of transition into CaringKind, the services that we have all year round, for people with dementia and their families. We serve a whole lot of people. We serve people who have Alzheimer's or any form of dementia, particularly if they are in the earlier stages, although we do have some program for all stages. We also serve family members, partners, friends, anybody who is informally providing care or support. We also provide some training for healthcare professionals, aides and service providers, and as well as for residential community and cultural organizations. In terms of the stuff that's relevant to the people on this call, so we have individual and family services. We have a helpline that's kind of our opening to any of our services. It's, you can call up, you can ask just an individual question, you can ask for resources that are available in the greater community, and you can ask for our services and to be referred to what we now call a navigator. They're pretty much social workers or working in some sort of a capacity like that. And the navigator does care consultations. We do family education workshops. We do support groups. We have individual coaching for caregiving skills. We do programs for people in the early stage, and we do social peer engagement, and we do work also around palliative approaches for people who are in the later stages as well. Our services are free of charge for individuals and families, and they are provided in multiple languages, including Spanish, Mandarin, Cantonese, Korean, and as you met me and Shira, we also provide some programming specifically to the Jewish community, and with the knowledge of the cultural and halachic issues that come up for people who are within our community. So just keeping that in mind. We have regular educational programming. It kind of changes, it changes month by month, although we do have some regular programs. We have a legal and financial seminar where an attorney will give an overview of the Medicaid application process. It's pretty much a two-parter. We have legal and financial, and then we have understanding Medicaid, which is a deeper dive into the Medicaid application process. And then we have Dementia 101 series, which is also a more deeper dive into understanding what dementia is, what caregiving looks like, and how to adjust to the diagnosis and life changes. You can find out any of our educational programs on our website under our Dementia Education Hub, and this is also the I'm forgetting what the thing is called, but that the thing you can access our website with. That's late. For our early stage programming, we have cognitive stimulation therapy, which is an evidence-based small group therapy. Its initial phase is 8 weeks, where we meet twice a week for an hour for a total of 16 sessions. After the completion of that initial 8-week group, there is a regular maintenance group as well. It's 6 months, but frankly, I've had people who have kind of been going ongoing until it is no longer useful for them, but we have other programs for them as well to sort of transition to. We have a Journey Together workshop, which is a 10-session early stage workshop and support group for people who have been newly diagnosed with dementia. And then we have a program called To Whom I May Concern, which is a lived experience storytelling workshop. It's also, I believe, 10 sessions where the people who are participating talk about their story of how they came to understand that they had dementia, how their relationships have changed, how their life has changed. It's developed into a script, and at the end of 10 sessions, it is performed live in our office. We have a bunch of recordings of that as well. I believe that's on our website. It is definitely on our YouTube channel. I highly recommend watching it. It is very, very powerful, and it really humanizes the experience, and I think gives a really good understanding of what it's like for a person to go through it. And I think it definitely helps caregivers. I think it helps people with dementia to hear from other people who are going through the same thing in a very kind of raw and honest way. So I highly recommend that. And if anybody, is a writer or likes to perform, it is highly recommended. It's a really nice experience for the participants. In terms of for the family members, so as I mentioned, we have our helpline. We have a Partnering Together workshop, which is sort of like parallel to the Journey Together workshop that I mentioned. And that's a 10-week support workshop for also caregivers of people who are, I guess, more new or early stage, who are, caregivers for people who are new or in the early stages of dementia. We have regular, like what I would call classic support groups, which are twice a month groups meeting for an hour and a half each time. It's sort of much more of a cathartic, just come as you are, no real agenda, just being together with other people who are going through the same thing. We do have different support groups for people who are spouses versus people who are adult children. We have other specialty groups as well. We do one-on-one coaching for people for caregivers around issues related to dementia-related behaviors. And we have a Medical Alert Wanderer Safety Program, which is a program with Medical Alert. It's titanium. It's a titanium bracelet. It is as low tech as you can possibly get. It has the person's name. I think it's definitely their first name, with a tracking number and with the medical alert number. If a person were to wander, and unfortunately about 2/3 of all people with dementia will wander, they may be found by a bystander. The bystander can look on the bottom of the bracelet. They'll see the information. They can call the medical alert number, give them the tracking number, and then the person can be returned home. It's been shown to reduce wandering time very significantly, which is very important from a safety perspective. If a person who's wandering is found by EMS, any sort of emergency personnel, they have direct access to the medical alert database, so they will get home even faster. And as I sort of touched on, the first 24 hours are crucial after a wandering incident. So this has really been shown to reduce wandering time, and has really been found to save lives. So that is also something to consider. So as I mentioned, in terms of music and dementia, we're going to be having our annual research symposium that will be on the 31st, which is next week. That's going to be in the Time Center in Manhattan. I know it's a bit of a schlep, but it looks to be like a really great program. And it's going to be all about breakthroughs in music, sound, and dementia research. So we are very excited about that. If anybody is able to attend, that would really be wonderful. And then we have other programs for people in all stages of dementia, and that we call that social engagement. We have a program called Connect to Culture, which provides dementia-friendly programming for people with dementia in various cultural institutions. We do museums. In fact, unfortunately, I was excited to share this one, except that it happened today. We have a partnership with the Eldridge Street Museum in the Lower East Side, and they were doing a virtual tour of the Lower East Side. So unfortunately, I couldn't share that one. I have a couple of the upcoming ones in my next slides. We have a Connect to Baseball program for any baseball fans. We have music programs. I'm actually, you know what? I'm not going to talk anymore. I will show you what we have. We have musicians from the Orpheus Orchestra, the Orpheus Chamber Orchestra. That's going to be on Thursday, April 3rd. It's something that you can either join in online, or you can come in person at our office, which is at 360 Lexington, which is pretty much 2 blocks away from Grand Central. It's between 40th and 41st. So that is, I mean, being in the office, I hear it. It's a wonderful experience if you can come. So highly recommended. We have a virtual Connect to Cafe, which is pretty much just virtually on Zoom, where you can meet up with people who have dementia and their family partners. These are people who are participating in our various early stage programs. It's a way to meet new people who are going through the same things in a more informal setting, a more social setting. It's not like a facilitated support group. It's more of just connecting with other people who are going through the same thing. And so, as I mentioned, for Connect to Baseball, we have 2 different groups. One of them is in person in our office on Lexington Avenue. We also have a virtual group, and I have the links to that as well. I think what we are planning to send the recording and the slides to anybody who registered. So you can feel free to grab those links once you have the slides.